The storm was supposed to erase everything. 2 women, 1 frozen forest, no witnesses, no second chances. A former Navy SEAL came to Michigan to disappear, not to save anyone. Silence was safer than responsibility. Distance felt like peace. But his dog stopped in the snow, and when the man followed, he found something the cold was meant to finish. They were not lost. They were left there. What began as a rescue uncovered a truth powerful people wanted, buried beneath ice and silence. And in the coldest night of his life, one man had to choose: walk away and survive, or stand still and let God decide what kind of man he would be. Upper Peninsula, Michigan, midwinter, Lake Superior wind driving snow sideways through black spruce, a night when the forest swallowed sound. Jack Holloway lived alone in a small log cabin pressed deep into the trees. He was 38, tall and solid, built by discipline rather than display. Dark hair cut short, a rough beard, pale eyes that rarely softened. A former Navy SEAL, Jack had not come north to find peace or redemption. He came to reduce the world to something manageable. Silence helped. Distance helped. Winter helped most of all. The cabin reflected him. Functional, sparse. Wood stacked cleanly by the stove, tools aligned, boots drying in a neat row. No photographs, no flags, no reminders of a life that asked for explanations. A radio murmured weather warnings he already understood. Outside, the storm tightened its grip. Inside, the fire burned low and steady. Jack had finished his checks. He had no intention of opening the door again until morning. Shadow changed that. The German shepherd lay near the hearth, large and still, his black and tan coat thick and weathered. At 7, Shadow moved like an old professional, quiet, efficient, conserving energy. A faint scar ran along his flank, a souvenir from service he never complained about. He rarely barked. He spoke through posture, through stillness. Jack trusted him the way he once trusted men who watched his blind spots without being asked. Without sound, Shadow's body shifted, ears lifted, spine tightened. His head rose slowly, nose angling toward the door. No growl, no pacing, just focus. Jack noticed immediately. Silence, to him, had always been a form of communication. Shadow stood and held still, listening to something beyond human hearing. Then he looked back at Jack once, eyes intent, unblinking. Not curiosity, urgency. Whatever waited outside was not wildlife wandering close for shelter. It was something wrong enough to break routine. Jack felt the change inside himself, the familiar narrowing of thought, the return of an older rhythm. He set his mug down, pulled on his insulated jacket, gloves and cap. A flashlight clipped to his belt. Rope looped over his shoulder. The movements were automatic, muscle memory untouched by years of quiet living. When he opened the door, the cold struck hard, stealing breath. Snow drove sideways, sharp as sand. The porch vanished almost immediately behind the white. Shadow surged forward, head low, tail steady, cutting a clean line through drifts already reshaping themselves. Jack followed, keeping the cabin at his back until it disappeared, trusting Shadow's path when landmarks dissolved. Sound collapsed. Distance became meaningless. They moved into the trees. The wind shifted pitch, funneled by terrain. Shadow slowed, then angled east, pace tightening. Jack followed without question, light sweeping ground and trunks, catching nothing but snow and shadow. Yet the pressure in his chest grew, not fear, but recognition. This was movement with purpose. This was the feeling he had tried to outwalk by coming here. Deeper still, Shadow stopped. He did not advance. He did not retreat. He stood rigid, ears forward, breath controlled, attention locked ahead on something Jack could not yet see. The forest felt suddenly closer, as if holding its breath. Snow continued to fall, soft and relentless, erasing time as efficiently as tracks. Jack stepped up beside the dog, scanning the darkness beyond the beam of his light. Whatever waited ahead had already crossed an invisible line. He did not know what it was, only that turning back now would mean choosing comfort over clarity. He tightened his grip on the rope, nodded once to Shadow, and moved forward into the storm, unaware of exactly what awaited him, but certain that the night had already decided he would not remain a bystander. Jack moved past the point where the forest felt neutral and into a space that felt staged. The wind thinned briefly, not enough to soften the storm, only enough to reveal form within the white. Shadow stood rigid several steps ahead, body angled forward, ears locked, every muscle tuned toward a single point among the trees. Jack followed the dog's focus and saw the tree first. A massive pine rose out of the snow, its lower branches bare, upper limbs sagging under the weight of ice. The trunk was scarred where bark had been cut away. Rope hung down in two clean vertical lines, pale against the dark wood. Then he saw the women. They were suspended from a thick branch, wrists bound and looped over the limb above, boots hovering just above the snowpack. Their coats were stiff with frost, fabric cracked where cold had set deep. Their bodies slumped forward, weight held entirely by their shoulders and restraints. Breath, if it existed, was nearly invisible in the storm. The scene did not shock Jack. It clarified something cold and precise in his mind. This was not an accident. This was not exposure by mistake. This was an execution delayed by winter. Shadow moved beneath them without command, planting himself directly below the hanging bodies, shoulders braced, stance squared. He positioned himself as if instinctively calculating weight, as if he understood that seconds mattered. Jack swept his light across the ground. Compressed snow, deliberate footprints, no sign of struggle, no frantic movement. Whoever had done this had known exactly how long the cold would take to finish the work. Jack stepped closer and assessed the ropes with gloved hands, testing tension, tracing the path up the trunk to the branch. He chose the order of release by breathing, not by size. The woman on the right was taller, broader through the shoulders, built like someone used to hauling gear through rough terrain. Her blonde hair had come loose from a practical braid and frozen against her cheek. Her breathing was shallow and irregular, her chin slumped dangerously toward her chest. The second woman was smaller, leaner, her dark hair plastered to her face in icy strands. Her frame carried less mass but more tension, as if her body had resisted longer before exhaustion set in. Her breaths came faster, steadier. Jack recognized the difference immediately. Hypothermia did not take everyone the same way. Sometimes it took the strong first. Snow continued to fall, erasing edges, muting sound. Jack anchored a rope around his waist and secured it to the tree with a knot his hands remembered without thought. He pulled off his gloves briefly, despite the cold, fingers numbing as he tested the branch's stability and adjusted tension with precision earned elsewhere. Shadow remained planted beneath the women, breath steaming upward in controlled bursts. Jack cut the rope holding the taller woman and controlled her descent, guiding her weight down inch by inch. Her boots touched snow, and her knees collapsed instantly. Shadow shifted forward, absorbing part of the drop as Jack eased her fully down and lowered her onto a ground pad, insulating her from the frozen earth. Jack loosened her collar just enough to allow airflow and rubbed warmth back into her hands until faint color returned. He did not linger. Jack looked up again. The smaller woman swayed slightly as snow slid off the branch above. Jack adjusted for her lighter weight and cut the rope, guiding her down while Shadow pressed his flank against her legs to steady her. Once she was on the ground, Jack wrapped both women in spare thermal layers, sealing in what little heat remained. The forest stayed silent. No witnesses, no help coming. As Jack worked, his awareness widened. He scanned the tree line again and noted what was missing. No broken branches from panic, no chaotic tracks, only clean, deliberate compression leading away from the base of the tree. He noticed a strip of fabric nailed to the trunk at eye level, stiff with ice. He did not read it. The message was clear without words. The smaller woman stirred first. Her body trembled as warmth reached her core unevenly. Her brow tightened, lips parting as breath deepened. Jack steadied her, keeping her flat, adjusting layers to prevent shock. Her eyes opened briefly, dark and alert even through exhaustion, then closed again as her breathing stabilized. The taller woman remained unconscious longer. Her chest rose shallowly, pulse faint but present. Jack monitored both, measuring time in breaths and degrees, calculating the narrow margin before the storm erased any chance of movement altogether. Shadow stayed close, shifting only when Jack needed space, then returning immediately to place himself between the women and the open forest. Jack made the decision without hesitation. The cabin was more than a mile away through terrain already becoming treacherous. Carrying both at once would risk losing all three. He lifted the taller woman first, her weight dead and uncooperative, her head resting against his shoulder. Shadow moved ahead, stopping periodically to check Jack's line. Jack fashioned a makeshift sled from his pack frame and cord, securing her carefully before turning back. The smaller woman's awareness flickered now, but her legs responded when guided. Jack looped a rope across his shoulder and around her waist, keeping her upright without forcing speed. The storm tightened around them as they moved, wind tearing at exposed skin, snow filling boots, breath scraping raw. Yet beneath the strain, something steadied Jack. Responsibility returned, heavy but clarifying. He was no longer hiding, he was moving forward. Behind them, the tree stood silent as fresh snow erased what it had witnessed. Whatever sentence had been passed there, winter had been denied its verdict. The cabin came back into the world slowly, first as a shape, then as warmth pushing against cold that refused to leave all at once. Firelight crept across the log walls, steady and low, the air carrying the mixed smells of pine resin, wet fabric, and snow melting into wood. Outside, the storm still pressed against the structure, but its violence had dulled into a constant presence rather than an immediate threat. Jack moved with quiet precision, stripping away frozen layers and replacing them with dry wool and thermal blankets. He worked without haste, but without pause, hands steady, eyes always measuring. Shadow stayed close, his large body positioned between the hearth and the door, angled outward, ears alert, even as his breathing slowed. He shook once, shedding snow and ice, then settled again, a living barrier that radiated heat. The smaller woman stirred first. Her body reacted before her mind did, a sharp intake of breath followed by a tremor that ran through her frame. She drew her shoulders inward instinctively, conserving heat even before her eyes opened. When they did, they were dark and focused despite exhaustion, tracking the unfamiliar ceiling, the fire, the man moving nearby. Her name was Emma Wright. She was 32, lean and compact, built for endurance rather than strength. Her dark hair, cut just past her shoulders for practicality, hung loose now, tangled and drying. Her face was narrow, cheekbones sharp, expression alert in a way that suggested a mind trained to catalog details automatically. Jack noticed the way her gaze moved. Not panicked. Assessing. He adjusted the blanket at her shoulders and spoke for the first time since they'd reached the cabin, his voice low and even, words economical. He told her she was safe, that the cold was retreating, that moving too quickly would make things worse. Emma nodded once, a small, controlled motion. She did not try to sit up. That restraint told him more than questions would have. The taller woman followed more slowly. Her return was heavier, as if consciousness had to push through layers of ice before it could surface. Her breathing deepened first, chest rising with more authority. Color crept back into her hands. When her eyes opened, they held steady, pale and watchful beneath lashes still rimmed with frost. Her name was Claire Donovan, 36. Tall, broad-shouldered, her strength the kind earned over years of hauling equipment and cutting trails rather than any formal training regimen. Her blonde hair, once braided tight for utility, had come loose and dried stiff around her face. A faint scar cut through one eyebrow, old and clean, the result of an accident years back that had taken a fellow ranger's life and left Claire with a deep distrust of shortcuts. Claire did not speak immediately. She tested sensation first, flexing fingers, shifting weight. Pain registered and was accepted. Only then did she look at Jack, then at Shadow, recognition flickering as understanding assembled itself piece by piece. Jack positioned them both carefully near the hearth, not too close, monitoring their responses to heat. He brought water warmed slowly, encouraging small sips. He watched for signs of shock, adjusting posture, blankets, distance. Shadow mirrored his vigilance, shifting whenever either woman moved, pressing closer when a shiver passed through Claire's frame, then easing back into his guard position. Minutes stretched, then longer. Emma was the first to speak again. Her voice was hoarse but controlled, shaped by someone used to being precise, even under strain. She asked how long they had been out there. Jack gave an estimate without dramatizing it. Her jaw tightened briefly. She closed her eyes, not in fear but calculation. When she opened them again, she spoke with intention. She told him they had not been hiking. They had not been lost. They had been working. Claire picked up the thread without hesitation, her voice steadier, lower. She was a state ranger assigned to winter patrols along protected land near Lake Superior. She knew the terrain, the access roads, the places where storms erased evidence and where they didn't. Emma was an environmental data analyst, temporarily embedded for field verification. Together, they had noticed discrepancies that didn't fit seasonal patterns. Emma explained it in fragments at first, pausing when breath or strength demanded. Satellite readings that didn't align with on-site conditions. Chemical signatures appearing in water samples where no discharge permits existed. Vehicle tracks that vanished from official logs but reappeared after storms. She had learned early in her career that data rarely lied, but people often ignored what it said. Claire added what the ground had told her. The smell of treated timber where none should be. The unnatural straightness of felled trees hidden beneath snow. Machinery that moved only at night. She had reported it up the chain, first cautiously, then with insistence. The responses had been polite, delayed, incomplete. Silence where there should have been resistance. Jack listened without interrupting, feeding the fire, eyes occasionally flicking to the door, to Shadow, then back to the women. He did not ask who was behind it yet. He understood how these things unfolded. Patterns first, names later. Emma continued, voice tightening slightly now, not from cold, but memory. Reports began disappearing from shared systems. Files corrupted, GPS logs resetting themselves. Not erased outright, but altered just enough to introduce doubt. She had started backing everything up offline, setting automated transfers on delays. If something happened to her, the data would not vanish quietly. Claire nodded once, grim. When they decided to investigate one last anomaly in person, it wasn't bravado. It was confirmation. They had gone out expecting resistance, not capture. The men who found them had been efficient, practiced. No threats, no explanations. Just rope, silence, and the understanding that winter would do what bullets would make noisy. The cabin absorbed the weight of that truth. Outside, the storm battered the walls, snow piling against the shutters until the world beyond narrowed to wind and darkness. Jack secured the door again, reinforced the latch, and checked the generator by touch alone. He did not look for pursuit yet. He prepared for possibility. Emma watched him work, eyes following details, cataloging habits. Claire rested, conserving strength, but her posture remained alert, shoulders squared even beneath blankets. Shadow settled slightly closer to the women now, as if they had shifted in his internal map from strangers to assigned. Hours passed without ceremony. The fire crackled, wet clothing steamed, color returned to faces. Emma's hands stopped shaking. Claire's breathing found a steady rhythm. Jack remained awake, seated where he could see both women and the door, posture relaxed but ready, as if rest were a concept rather than an option. When Emma spoke again, it was quieter, heavier. She said they hadn't been meant to be found. The placement of the tree, the distance from trails, the timing of the storm, it had all been designed to delay discovery, not to scare, to erase. Survival changed the equation. Jack met her gaze then, pale eyes steady. He did not reassure her with promises. He did not offer platitudes. He told her only what he knew to be true. Someone had miscalculated, and miscalculations had consequences. Shadow lifted his head slightly as the wind shifted outside, ears angling, attention sharpening. Jack noticed immediately. He rose, checked the seals once more, and moved supplies closer within reach. The night was not over yet. But for now, the cabin held. Heat held. Breath held. What had survived the night was not just flesh. It was evidence. It was intention. And it was no longer alone. The storm eased just enough to change its voice. It was not quieter, only sharper, the wind breaking into uneven pulses that carried information rather than noise. Jack noticed it first in the way Shadow lifted his head, ears angling toward the north-facing wall, body unfolding from rest into readiness without haste. The German shepherd did not rush. At 7, his movements were measured, economical, confidence built from repetition rather than youth. His black and tan coat was still damp near the legs, drying slowly in the cabin's heat, but the line of his spine tightened as if something outside had shifted the rules. Jack rose immediately. He did not wake the women with words. He adjusted their blankets instead, careful not to jolt their recovering bodies, positioning them farther from the windows where silhouettes might form. Emma watched him with quiet focus, her strength not fully returned, but her awareness sharp. Claire pushed herself up slightly on one elbow, jaw set, pain accepted without comment. Neither asked questions. They had learned in different ways when silence mattered. Shadow moved to the door and froze, nose lifting, breath slowing. Jack followed the dog's attention, crouching to study the seam where snow had piled against the threshold. At first glance, it looked untouched, wind-sculpted like everything else. Then he saw what didn't belong. A shallow depression pressed inward rather than outward. Snow displaced by intention, not weather. Jack pulled on his boots and jacket again, movements smooth, practiced. He checked the rifle leaning by the wall, but left it where it was. Noise would complicate things. He took the flashlight, a multi-tool, and a length of cord. Shadow waited, eyes fixed, tail still. Outside, the cold cut deep, sharper now that the wind had shifted. The porch creaked under Jack's weight as he stepped down, keeping his center low, eyes scanning before light. Snow had drifted high against the cabin, but there was a line where it had been disturbed recently, compacted, and then carefully disguised. Whoever had been here knew how to move without announcing themselves. That knowledge narrowed Jack's focus further. Shadow stepped past him, nose close to the ground, following a scent trail faint enough that Jack would have missed it entirely. The dog stopped near the back corner of the cabin, posture locking again. Jack crouched and brushed aside loose powder with a gloved hand. The wire revealed itself by absence. A thin line stretched taut at ankle height, nearly invisible against shadowed wood. It ran from the porch support toward a small device half buried near the foundation, its casing dark, edges clean. Not crude, not rushed. Jack followed the line with his eyes, then his hands, careful not to disturb tension. This was not a warning. This was a termination attempt placed where panic or exhaustion would finish the job. Jack's jaw tightened. He disabled the device with controlled speed, cutting the wire and isolating the charge without triggering it. The cold bit through his gloves, but his fingers remained steady. Shadow stood watch, body angled outward, ears tracking the forest while Jack worked. When it was done, Jack marked the spot mentally and moved laterally, scanning for symmetry. People who laid one trap often laid more. He found signs quickly. Compressed snow where wind should have erased it. Boot impressions spaced for stability, not speed. The faint smell of oil carried by fabric, too deliberate to be accidental. This was not a passerby. This was someone checking their work. Jack circled back toward the door and slipped inside, sealing it behind him with quiet care. The warmth felt heavier now, charged. Emma's eyes met his immediately, reading the answer before he spoke. Claire straightened as much as her body allowed, shoulders squaring beneath the blanket. "They didn't leave," Jack said, voice low. Emma absorbed that, fingers curling unconsciously against the fabric. She had grown up in systems where danger came disguised as delay, where silence often meant consent. This was different. This was pursuit. Claire exhaled slowly through her nose. Her years as a ranger had taught her the difference between threats meant to scare and actions meant to conclude. This was the latter. She glanced toward the door, then at Shadow, who had resumed his position between them and the outside world. Jack moved methodically, securing shutters, reinforcing the latch, shifting supplies closer to hand. He did not pace. He did not rush. He prepared. He checked lines of sight from the windows and then blocked them, reducing silhouettes. He moved furniture just enough to clear the floor, creating space without noise. Emma pushed herself upright a little more, wincing but steady. She spoke quietly, each word deliberate. She said that when systems wanted things erased, they rarely relied on chance. The men who had left them in the woods would not accept uncertainty. Loose ends invited exposure. Exposure threatened profit. Jack nodded once. He understood the logic. Winter had been chosen as a collaborator. It had failed. Shadow shifted suddenly, head snapping toward the rear wall, ears forward, body tense. Jack froze, reading the dog's posture. This was not scent alone. This was proximity. He moved to the wall and listened. At first there was nothing but wind. Then a sound that did not belong to weather, a faint scrape, metal against wood, careful and controlled. Jack motioned for stillness. Emma held her breath without being told. Claire's hand tightened in the blanket, fingers curling as if around a tool no longer there. Shadow pressed closer to the wall, every muscle coiled. The sound stopped. Seconds stretched. Then longer. Jack did not move. He waited. Whoever was outside was disciplined enough to test reactions, to listen for panic. When none came, the pressure shifted. A footstep crunched deliberately farther out, then another. Movement without haste. Jack let the breath out slowly. He did not pursue. Not yet. The advantage remained inside. Heat, shelter, information. He reinforced the door once more and returned to the center of the cabin, positioning himself where he could see both the women and the likely points of entry. Emma spoke again, quieter now. She said she had set contingencies, automatic data transfers on delays. If she missed a scheduled check-in, files would move to multiple endpoints. She did not say where. She did not need to. The implication settled into the room like another presence. Jack met her gaze, a flicker of something like approval passing between them. Preparation mattered. Claire shifted, grimacing as sensation returned unevenly to her limbs. She said the men they'd encountered were not locals. Their movement had been too clean, too practiced. She had seen that kind of efficiency before, usually attached to operations that didn't want to exist. Outside, the wind rose again, covering sound, erasing evidence. Shadow finally lowered his head slightly, though his ears remained alert. Jack remained standing. Rest could wait. The danger had crossed a line. It was no longer something waiting in the forest. It had come to the door, tested it, and learned where the edges were. The cabin held. For now. The storm sharpened without warning. Wind broke its own rhythm. Snow thickened. Visibility collapsed. Jack felt it click into place. This was the kind of weather men waited for. Shadow was already up. No sound. No hesitation. Ears forward, body angled toward the rear wall, breath slowed to control steam. At 7, the German Shepherd moved with the economy of long habit, muscle held in reserve, instinct refined by years of work beside people who depended on him to be right. Jack acted immediately. He killed excess light, let the fire dim, closed shutters to erase silhouettes. Emma tracked his movements from her place near the hearth, alert despite weakness, mind fully engaged. Claire pushed herself upright a few inches, teeth clenched, pain accepted as background noise. Shadow positioned himself between the women and the back of the cabin. Jack touched the dog's shoulder once. A confirmation. "Stay." The sound came through the wind, clean and wrong. A brief scrape, wood against metal, controlled, testing. Jack did not answer it. He slipped into his jacket, took the flashlight and cord, and moved to the side door. It opened just enough to let him out. The cold cut hard. Snow swallowed him immediately. He sealed the door behind him and stayed low, using the cabin's shadow. Breath measured, steps deliberate. He circled wide. Through the storm, a shape resolved near the back wall. One man, lean, compact, dark layers designed for movement. Head tilted slightly, listening more than watching. Not local, not nervous. A second presence lingered farther out, half lost among trees, covering distance and angle. Jack did not rush. He shifted snow deliberately, a controlled noise placed to suggest retreat. The closer man reacted at once, posture tightening. He advanced, careful but curious. Jack led him away from the cabin. Footing turned deceptive where wind had glazed packed snow beneath fresh drifts. Jack waited until momentum overtook caution. The man slipped. Jack closed fast. One impact, breath gone, balance broken. He pinned the man cleanly and stripped the weapon before resistance could organize. The struggle lasted seconds. The man stopped fighting not from fear, but calculation. Up close, he was mid-30s, angular face hardened by exposure rather than time, short beard iced with snow, eyes sharp, professional. Jack bound his wrists with cord, checked circulation, then searched him. The device came out of the inner jacket pocket, compact, sealed, scratched from use. A faint pulse cycling through intervals. Jack shut it down. The second man withdrew immediately, melting back into the trees once the advantage was lost. Jack did not chase. Control mattered more than pursuit. He dragged the captive back toward the cabin, using the storm to erase movement. Shadow was waiting at the door, broad chest squared, eyes locked on the man. No sound, just presence. Inside, Emma took one look at the device and understood. Her fingers tightened against the blanket. Claire's gaze moved from the man's gear to his posture, then back to Jack. Clean, maintained, not a scavenger. Jack secured the captive against the reinforced wall, away from the women and the door. He removed the man's gloves, checked for blades, then covered him to keep hypothermia from complicating things. He still did not ask questions. Emma spoke first. Quiet. Precise. She recognized the structure of the device, timed check-ins, coordinated movement. That meant routes, a schedule, an assumption that no one would be alive to interrupt it. Jack activated a cached map fragment. Lines converged north toward a narrow corridor where terrain forced passage. A transfer point, not the end. Claire exhaled slowly. It matched what she had seen. Too clean, too organized. This wasn't cleanup. It was logistics. The captive tested his bindings once, then looked at Jack. "Who are you?" he asked. Jack ignored him. Outside, the storm covered everything. Tracks erased, sound buried, the cabin held. Jack placed the device on the table between himself and Emma. "This doesn't end tonight," she said. "No," Jack replied. "It starts." Shadow settled back into position, not relaxed, just ready. The night had tried to pass without witnesses. It failed. Dawn never fully arrived. The storm loosened its grip just enough to thin the darkness into a hard blue, light without warmth, revealing a world scraped clean and sharp. Lake Superior lay beyond the trees like a held breath, its surface locked beneath ice that groaned and shifted with a sound like distant thunder. Jack chose the timing deliberately. Night erased tracks too completely. Full day invited witnesses. This hour belonged to movement. They moved light. Emma walked with care, her stride compact and precise, strength still rationed after the cold, but focus absolute. At 32, she carried herself like someone accustomed to balancing weight and stamina, dark hair pulled tight at the nape of her neck, face intent rather than tense. She wore layers borrowed from Jack's stores, practical and unmarked, hands steady inside insulated gloves that had already learned her grip. Years of analysis had trained her to see patterns before conclusions, to let evidence speak before she did. Claire followed a few steps behind, taller, broader, shoulders squared despite lingering stiffness. 36 had settled into her frame without softening it. Her blonde hair was bound tight again, scar above her brow, pale against wind-bitten skin. She moved with the confidence of someone who trusted ground more than systems, eyes reading slope, snow depth, the way drifts lay where wind favored them. The cold had taught her patience early. A rock slide years back had taken a colleague and left her with a habit of checking anchors twice, then once more. Shadow ranged ahead and back, black and tan coat dusted with frost, posture low and fluid. At 7, he chose each step with intention, conserving strength, nose working constantly. He did not pull. He guided. His presence threaded the group together, a moving perimeter that adjusted without command. Jack took point when the trees thinned and the ice began. He wore darker layers now, silhouette broken by snow, movements economical. The device's cached map had given him a line, not a destination. Terrain would confirm the rest. He read the lake the way he once read streets, measuring distance, sound, and consequence. Ice did not forgive haste. They reached the first marker without ceremony. A line where the snow lay wrong, drifted over something warmer than it should have been. Jack knelt and brushed aside powder with the back of his glove. A vent cap revealed itself, metal dark against white, rimmed with ice where vapor had condensed and frozen. The smell came next, faint but unmistakable. Treated chemicals, the kind that did not belong in protected water. Emma set her pack down and worked quickly. She moved with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this before under worse conditions, extracting a compact camera, aligning lenses, capturing identifiers rather than scenes. Serial markings, weld seams, the angle of installation. She recorded readings from a handheld sensor, lips tightening as numbers climbed where they should not. She did not comment. She did not need to. Claire walked the perimeter, counting steps, noting gradients, the way tire scars etched faint arcs beneath ice where vehicles had turned without stopping. She marked positions with small beacons pressed discreetly into packed snow, each placed where a tire would pass without noticing. Her hands were steady. This was ground truth, the language she trusted. Jack stayed upwind, eyes scanning the horizon, rifle slung but unused. He watched the ice, watched shadow, listened for the kind of vibration that traveled through bone before it reached ear. Lake Superior did not sleep, but it remembered. Pressure ridges whispered. The ice shifted. He adjusted positions without speaking, placing himself where sightlines converged and escape narrowed. Movement came as vibration first, a low tremor that resolved into engine noise, muted by distance and ice. Jack raised a fist. Emma stilled. Claire crouched. Shadow flowed into a low crouch near a pressure ridge, body coiled, attention locked. 2 trucks emerged from the tree line farther down the shore, heavy-duty, modified for cold. Lights were kept low, beams angled down to avoid reflection across the ice. Exhaust plumed white. Men moved with practiced efficiency, silhouettes layered in dark insulated gear, faces obscured by hoods and distance. No wasted motion, no chatter. Jack counted positions, spacing, angles. He shifted, exposing just enough movement to register, then withdrew along a line that would draw attention without commitment. It worked. 2 figures broke off, advancing cautiously, boots crunching on ice, rifles carried with discipline rather than display. Jack retreated toward a narrower approach where the ice thickened unevenly, pressure ridges forcing a single line of travel. He did not rush. He let the lake shape the encounter. At his signal, Shadow cut across the approach, not charging, simply appearing where he should not be, forcing hesitation. Momentum collapsed inward, options narrowed. Emma worked without looking up. Her camera tracked plates and markings etched into metal rather than uniforms. She captured the rhythm of movement, the way doors opened, the timing between steps. Evidence that survived silence. Claire placed the last beacon and withdrew, path memorized, every rise and dip counted. Her breath came hard but controlled. Pain existed. It did not decide. The moment broke when geometry changed. Lights flared at both ends of the shoreline corridor, white and blinding, transforming blue dawn into stark exposure. Vehicles blocked exits with deliberate placement. Doors opened in unison. Figures moved with rehearsed clarity, weapons trained, angles covered. The lead agent stepped forward, tall, early 40s, square build, face weathered by fieldwork rather than comfort. His beard was trimmed close, hair dark and receding, posture calm with authority that did not need volume. Beside him moved a woman a few years younger, compact and athletic, hair pulled into a tight bun beneath a cap, eyes sharp with a patience built from dismantling systems piece by piece. The federal team fanned out and locked the space down. The men by the trucks froze, hands rising as commands cut clean through the cold. No sirens, no shouting, just control. Jack withdrew to cover, maintaining overwatch until the perimeter held. Shadow returned to his side, chest heaving once before settling, eyes still scanning. Emma lowered her camera only when the scene stabilized, data already duplicated and secured. Claire straightened despite fatigue, shoulders lifting as held tension released. The operation concluded methodically. Individuals were secured, vehicles immobilized. Compartments opened under scrutiny. Snow continued to fall, softening edges without obscuring truth. The lake, once a collaborator, had become a ledger written in light and steel. When it was done, Jack signaled withdrawal. Emma packed her equipment with precise movements. Claire retrieved the final marker, leaving nothing behind that would betray their presence. Shadow took point on the return, posture easing only slightly, vigilance tempered by completion rather than relief. Dawn came thin and sharp, not warmth, just visibility. Snow still fell, lighter now, enough to seal tracks, but not erase what stood in plain sight. The shoreline was locked down before the day could pretend nothing had happened. Federal vehicles moved first. Exits closed. Engines idled. Men by the trucks froze as geometry turned against them. Hands went up without argument. Timing had been taken away, and with it, leverage. Marcus Hale stepped forward to direct the perimeter. Early 40s, tall, square build, movements calm and efficient. His beard was trimmed close, his expression unreadable. He had the posture of someone used to finishing things quietly. Orders came short, clear, no wasted motion. Lena Ortiz worked beside him, compact, fast, eyes always moving. Her dark hair was pulled tight, her focus narrow and exact. She documented everything in sequence, ensuring nothing slipped through cracks she had seen swallow cases before. Evidence mattered more than statements. Vehicles were opened, compartments exposed, serial numbers photographed, containers logged. The cold slowed hands but preserved detail. Winter held everything exactly where it had been left. Emma transferred her files without commentary. Timestamps aligned, chemical readings matched discharge points, images synced with physical markers. She stood straight now, fatigue secondary to certainty. The system she built to survive interference was no longer hidden. Claire walked the perimeter with an agent, pointing out routes, storms favored, and where tracks always returned. Her movements were economical, her voice steady. She spoke only when terrain mattered. It did. One arrest drew attention. A middle-aged man was pulled from a truck, broad-chested, hair thinning, expression annoyed rather than afraid. His jacket beneath the outer layer was expensive. Authority had made him careless. Lena logged the detail and moved on. Marcus confirmed identity and nodded once. That was enough. The operation tightened. Men were cuffed, vehicles prepared for transport, samples sealed, chains of custody established. No resistance, no speeches. Jack stayed back, watching angles until they stopped changing. Shadow remained at his side, calm now, vigilance easing without fully releasing. The work was done. Marcus approached Jack briefly. A nod. Thanks without ceremony. Jack returned it. Nothing more was required. Snow eased into a steady fall as the last truck was secured. Dawn spread fully now, exposing everything Winter had tried to keep quiet. The lake groaned beneath the ice, a sound that carried far. Jack signaled withdrawal. Emma packed her remaining gear. Claire erased their last markers. Shadow took point. Pace easy. Task complete. They moved away as the federal team finished the cleanup. Tracks filled behind them. The shoreline closed. Morning settled in without drama. The storm had moved east, leaving behind a clean, hard quiet that made every sound deliberate. Snow lay fresh across the clearing, unmarked except for Shadow's tracks cutting fast, confident arcs through the white. The cabin stood scarred but intact, log walls bearing shallow wounds where metal had struck wood. Jack studied them without flinching. Damage meant history. History could be repaired. He stayed, not because there was nowhere else to go, but because leaving would turn the place back into a refuge rather than a responsibility. Jack pulled on gloves, gathered tools, and set to work. He replaced splintered timber first, measuring twice, cutting once. The rhythm was steady, physical, grounding. Each repaired seam closed more than a gap in the wall. It closed the distance he had kept from the world. Shadow ranged nearby, energy released now that vigilance was no longer required. At 7, he still ran like purpose itself, black and tan coat bright against the snow, tail carving clean lines. He paused often, circling back to Jack before pushing forward again, a habit formed from years of working perimeter and return. When Jack moved, Shadow moved. When Jack stopped, Shadow waited. The partnership had never needed explanation. Emma visited briefly before leaving. She looked stronger now, posture upright, movements efficient. The cold had taken its toll, but it had not slowed her mind. She wore her own clothes again, practical and unmarked, hair tied back neatly. She spoke about reinstatement meetings and reports that would finally be read. She did not talk about fear. She talked about systems and safeguards, about making it harder for silence to win next time. Jack listened, nodding once. He handed her a copied drive, redundant by design. She smiled at that, a small, genuine thing, then shook his hand and left without ceremony. Claire came later, taller, broader, shoulders squared, as if weight had been set down and replaced with resolve. Her ranger jacket was back on, patched and familiar. The scar above her brow caught the light briefly as she surveyed the tree line, the lake beyond. She spoke less than Emma, preferring to walk the perimeter with Jack, confirming what storms had changed and what they had not. She thanked him once, directly, without embellishment. Then she turned toward the road, boots steady, work waiting elsewhere. The cabin grew quiet again. Jack did not mistake it for loneliness. He finished reinforcing the doorframe and checked the generator, then stacked wood for nights that would come whether he invited them or not. He brewed coffee and drank it standing, watching steam rise and vanish. The radio crackled with routine traffic now, voices unremarkable, the kind that meant life had resumed its ordinary pace. That was fine. Shadow settled near the porch, head on paws, eyes half-lidded, but aware. The dog had given everything he needed to give and asked for nothing in return. Jack sat on the step beside him and rested a hand on the thick fur at his neck. The contact was simple, enough. He thought about the war he had carried north and how it had loosened its grip not by being erased, but by being redirected. He had not been called back to fight. He had been called to stand. There was a difference. Snow continued to fall lightly, smoothing the last signs of urgency. The forest did not judge. The lake did not speak. The cabin, repaired and steady, held its ground. Jack stayed, not to hide, but to keep watch. And in that choice he found a peace that did not require distance to survive. At the end of this story, one quiet truth remains. Miracles do not always arrive as thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes they arrive as a moment when someone chooses not to look away. A man who could have stayed hidden steps forward. A loyal dog senses danger before words exist. A door opens when fear would have been easier. God often works through ordinary obedience rather than extraordinary spectacle. Jack did not stop the darkness by force alone. He stopped it by standing where he was needed when it mattered most. In the same way, faith in our daily lives is rarely about grand gestures. It is about small decisions made with courage, speaking up when silence is safer, helping when it costs us comfort, staying when running feels easier. We may never face a frozen lake or a winter storm like this, but we all face moments when someone near us needs protection, truth, or hope. Those moments are invitations. And when we answer them, God turns simple choices into lasting impact. If this story moved your heart, let it remind you that God is still working quietly through people who choose to act with love and responsibility. Share this story with someone who needs encouragement today. Leave a comment with your thoughts or prayer requests. Subscribe to the channel so these stories can reach more hearts. And if you believe that God still works through courage, compassion, and obedience, type Amen in the comments. May God bless you, protect you, and guide you through every storm you face.